And time would come, I feel that these mercenaries or these insurgency movement, rebel groups is bound to spill over farther west to the Europe and also go to the East Russia. And it will be difficult, like what you said, that what happened in Russia is very difficult. And it will be, Ukraine will not be what it was. And for this, I blame everyone, to be honest. I blame the Russia for invading Ukraine, for what is happening. I also blame the Western leaders, including the NATO, for not, and also the United Nations, for not doing what they could have done to prevent the conflict.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and I'm here today with Major General Dr. AK Bardalai, a veteran of the Indian Armed Forces. Major General Bardalai is a graduate of the National Defense Academy in Pune, India, and of the Defense Service Staff College in Wellington, also in India. He's also an alumnus of Tilburg University, the Netherlands, from where he got his PhD in UN peace operations. General Bardalai was commissioned into the Indian Army in 1977, where he served as Brigade Major of a brigade in Sri Lanka. He commanded an infantry battalion in the Siachen Glacier and attended a high command course in the Army War College. Later, he became a Brigadier General Staff at the headquarters of the Eastern Army Command. He commanded an infantry division in the Western Theater of India in 2010 and 2011, and he was the commandant of the Indian military training team in Bhutan. General Bardalai has also served with the UN as a military observer in Angola and was deputy head of the mission and deputy force commander of UNIFIL in Lebanon. Since his retirement from the army in 2014, he is actively engaged with the academic study of UN peace operations, and he's a distinguished fellow of the USI of India. Major General Bardalai, thank you very much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
We scheduled this meeting between us because I want to bring in a perspective that is not directly impacted by the war in Ukraine. We want to talk about Ukraine. We want to talk about Russia and about the what is going on in world politics right now. But I would like to have an Indian perspective. And I know this is a very difficult task because we are one person and I will be asking you about how does India view the situation, but you're also a very experienced person of the Indian military, and I do believe you will be also able to give us some insights in how you view the geostrategy of the entire situation, and what kind of impact that then would have maybe on other parts of the world, which is something in international relations that we constantly want to understand. So, Major General, maybe let me ask you first personally. When you look at what's going on currently in Europe, how do you view the situation? How do you view Ukraine, Russia, the US, NATO?
Dr. Pascal, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. I'm really honored and humbled. I am not the spokesperson of Indian perception, nor I am a representative of the government. So what I'm going to talk to you is my purely personal opinion. But I have got reasons to believe that a lot of my colleagues think alike. To begin with, firstly, that I do not condone what Russia is doing. My heart goes to the people, innocent people, who unfortunately become the victim of all conflict and war. And I hope that war comes to an end. But when you look at it, I will not say that from Indian perspective, how I look at it. You know, I think both Russia and Ukraine are working because of their own national interest. I mean, all nations act because of the national interest. If I look at it, the national interest of Russia as of now is security, and Ukraine's sovereignty. But I find it very difficult to understand if you are very rigid and obsessed with our own national interest. Either way, I am not taking any sides. What is the cost? Is it worth that cost that millions of people had to leave their own homes and so many people have died? Having said that, Ukraine was always the red line for Russia. Understandable, purely security reasons. But after the fall of the last pro-Russian government in Ukraine, I think Putin was pushed to the edge. But I think he lived with it as long as the largest pro-Russian opposition party was in place in Ukraine, led by Medvedchuk. But the moment Medvedchuk was placed under house arrest, his media was taken off the air, I think Putin decided to cross the red line. But mind it, from the time Medvedchuk was placed under house arrest, and when Russia actual invasion is begin, it is close to 1 year. He has concentrated his troops. So signal was good enough signal. I think he was trying to communicate strategically that what he wanted. And that was the window of opportunity for everyone to prevent the conflict. But what had happened was at that point of time, again, European nations and United States only criticized Putin, threatened him with sanction, and I would say continued to encourage Zelensky that his decision to be obsessed with his sovereignty is absolutely correct. But what happened was when actual invasion began, I think Ukrainian president realized that nothing had come forward other than in number of in terms of arms and equipment. And of course, diplomacy continues. Now, diplomacy can continue in various ways. Now, going back a little bit, in 2014 and 15, Minsk agreement, they never worked out. When Putin started threatening to invade Ukraine, there are a flurry of activities, on behalf of Europe, mostly with the French president and also towards end Germany. Of course, USA was passing comments, mostly it was threatening. But I wish that had taken place slightly earlier. Now, what I wanted to say is that if the 1 year was still there, why Putin waited for 1 year? It was not a surprise. It was not a strategic or military or tactical surprise. They knew all along how Putin was going to invade. But why did he wait? According to my reading, he still wanted a diplomacy or politics to get a chance. To that extent that I think there is a requirement to assure Putin his concern of Ukraine's remaining neutral will be taken care of, and also convincing Ukraine that by remaining neutral, you can continue to progress, or rather than encouraging him to continue to take his stand against Russia, nobody tried to discourage him from what he did. I think this was the window of opportunity, I would say, West had failed. And herein comes, I would say, the role of the United Nations. United Nations have got a lot of weaknesses, a lot of criticism many people talk, what is the relevance of United Nations? What is the relevance of even peacekeeping operations? But despite all the weaknesses, I think this is the only organization which is relatively can be relied on and can be considered as neutral or impartial. Now, I want to bring in two aspects. Where it comes to leadership, people say that UN can do nothing. UN is what the member states make of. Yes, completely true. But what about the leaders? I will take your mind to Gaza operations, 1956. What had happened? Soon after Gaza Canal was nationalized by Egypt, there was a secret agreement between UK, France, and Israel. They moved in. It was a crisis situation. And they knew that Egypt was getting closer more towards the Russian side. Now, that was something like the situation dilemma for United Nations. But what had happened was, that time, the Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, he seized that initiative, and I would say he forced the hands of the Security Council and United Nations to pass a resolution for establishing an emergency force. Eventually, what had happened was, despite reluctance, USSR did not step in. France, UK, and Israel withdrew. You fast forward by about 4 years. If you remember what happened in Congo, 1960, no soon Congo became independent. Both the president and prime minister wrote to Secretary General that you do something because of the alleged secessionist movement by the past colonial master Belgium at Katanga province. Now, in that case, I think 12 July, they wrote a letter. 14 July, again Dag Hammarskjöld, he did not wait for any member of the Security Council to initiate a discussion. He exercised his power under Article 15, and he asked for an emergency meeting. First resolution was passed. But no sooner the resolution has passed, meanwhile, in 17 July, both the Prime Minister and the President of Congo told the representative of the Dag Hammarskjöld in Congo that, look, if you do not do something, we'll be forced to call the Russians, those days USSR. And it was an opportunity for the USSR to implicate the West about the imperialistic ideas. And USSR and USA did not want that, nor the Western Bloc did not want that. So as a result, what happened? Both the side did not want it. Both the side wanted that, let us do something. Now, debates that followed thereafter, entire discussions and debate was, I would say, I will not use this word monopolized. It was basically initiated and controlled by Dag Hammarskjöld. So he created an emergency. He convinced the Security Council members and General Assembly, we have to do something, because nobody wanted. Now, if you compare the situation in Ukraine, nobody wanted Russia to intervene. But information was available, there was intelligence available. Troops were concentrated, but they did not do anything to prevent that conflict. There is where coming that I'm reminded of Boutros Ghali in 1992, that he introduced the concept of agenda for peace. And one of the elements is preventive diplomacy. And preventive diplomacy, which include intelligence and preventive deployment. And yeah, sorry, you want to say something?
I need to ask you, because there was a flurry of diplomacy happening in December and January. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, flying to Moscow, Emmanuel Macron flying to Moscow. There was diplomacy going on, and it seems as if though there was an attempt at preventing this from happening. And I, at the time, thought this was strange because I didn't believe Russia would invade because of the cost, because this would be very hurtful to Ukraine, but also very hurtful to Russia. So I thought it is not in the interest of Russia to do that. But then it happened anyhow, and I was wrong. I was very wrong. Why did it fail? I mean, okay, we don't know what the discussions were, but how do you interpret why the diplomacy that did happen failed?
Okay, I'll tell you. My reading is that, yes, diplomacy was going on. So diplomacy basically to convince Russia that war is not a good option. That means Putin must have faith and listen to someone. As far as Russians are concerned, and Putin mostly, anyone from the Europe or Western Bloc, he would always look at them with suspicion. That is one. While they were telling him that cost of war is not good, we are thinking of imposing sanction, but really never heard anything. Someone is trying to convince Zelensky that give up this. If he had given up that,
the NATO membership, right?
NATO membership, and you should remain neutral, and we can compensate by something else. And I'm sure if he had given up the stand he has taken today he's saying that, well, I am not going to push it about a NATO membership. If he had maintained that about 4 weeks earlier when diplomacy was going on, but he had to be pushed. He had to be pushed by, I really do not know, like what you say, what has gone inside, but I do not think that, you see, today, okay, tell me, why? He knew all along, militarily, notwithstanding that military operation is not progressing as it has been anticipated. But look at it, purely in the terms of numbers, I think Ukraine is no match to Russian army. It's a matter of time. Only thing is the cost will be too high. Russians, a lot of soldiers will die. I mean, they could be anything, but no match. But he all along possibly thought that someone will come in my support. But nobody, if somebody told him that time, look, you would be on your own, your civilian population will die, we would be able to do only this much, that imposing sanctions on Putin, Russians, and will help you with armaments, will not be able to declare Ukraine as Ukrainian airspace a no-fly zone for obvious reasons, but you will be on your own. And I think he would have given a second thought. That is one part. Second is that even I thought that it was just a drama, Putin is not going to attack. Dr. Pascal, what I have realized so far in analyzing few of the past conflict, it is, I think, very important to correctly define the problem. And second is that to understand whom you are dealing with outside, what is in his mind. I'll give you a different example, going from my experience. I'll take you back to 1990s in Angola. When I was a military observer, young man, I knew only tactical issues, but one thought came to my mind that time that there's a fight between Dr. Jonas Savimbi, he was basically backed by the South African Western Bloc, and of course MPLA, Santos, backed by this from the eastern side. Now, Jonas Savimbi agreed after the peace agreement, well, election would be held and I will respect the result of the election. He said that. I kept thinking, why would he do that? That means he is very convinced that he would win the election. But the moment he lost, he said that is the most unfair election. Firstly, he said that all, and those days only observer, military observer mission, we are hand in lay with everyone. We are stealing diamonds. We are helping the present, those days, dispensation in the government who is in power. And he did a lot of things to harass us, basically giving signal that he doesn't believe us. And he went to Bush and picked up the weapons again. But if you look at his history, that man, when the third party, where he contested as the president of UNITA, that party, that was his third party. Before that, he was vice president of two parties, He left both the parties until he became president. That means he never accepted the second position. That is one. So I think if somebody has understood his mind, I would say that maybe that I think subject of anthropology is very, very important. If you can find out what is that man's mind, I would say that Hollywood is very good. Hollywood is very famous for making good movies. Recently, I watched the old movie, Sum of All Fears by Tom Clancy. When there was about to be nuclear war between Russia and America, only one lone CIA agent has been telling, no, he cannot do that. I have studied him well. He was the only man who was correct. So in this case, I am not a political scientist, not a psychiatrist. I thought like you thought that Putin will not invade. But he did. I think reading, and I'm sure that Europe, the most developed nation, they have got better people, more qualified people to be able to understand. And that happened. And I think he was not convinced. And really, like presently, whatever discussions or talks going on between Ukraine and Russia, and everything is not available in public domain. Not available. And I'm sure that finally Zelensky, when he said that I would like to have a one-to-one talk, I'm sure that Putin is going to, place his last card on the table. He will not be able to do anything. And I would look at it tactically. I think if you just look at the map of Eastern Ukraine, I think the strategic importance of the Mariupol is very important. And I have a feeling that until the Mariupol falls, I don't think any ceasefire will take place. Sorry, I don't know if I have answered your question or not.
So it's a very good answer, but can I ask you, since you're a tactician and a practitioner in the military, if you switch on CNN, BBC, MSNBC, or any Western media, you get the impression that Russia is bogged down, Russia is basically losing the war, this is becoming a trench warfare, and Russia failed. I mean, that's what we are being told over and over. If you read Russia Today, you just hear about how Russia is making territorial gains one after another. How do you interpret the military situation in Ukraine? I mean, Russia has more resources, but Ukraine has an immense territory, and we've seen what you can do with immense, difficult territory in Afghanistan. You can stall great powers for decades. Where do you see the tactical situation at the moment?
I think you are correct. We anticipated militarily a very quick end to the conflict, but it has not progressed as anticipated. The one school of thought, very difficult to prove, they said that he is probably deliberately delaying it. But I will not give much weight to this. But I would feel that I think they never expected such a resistance from Ukraine. I mean, it is a source of inspiration when you look at the TV footage and you see that Ukrainian citizens lining up outside the blood bank, they're collecting empty bottles to be used as Molotov cocktail, and some of them are not leaving the country. So I can understand their pride in the sovereignty. I mean, rarely seen. I don't think Russia had expected that. There, I think that must be the reason. I don't think Putin wanted to use Air Force and missiles and artillery. He thought that possibly simply advancing by tanks, I think Eastern Ukraine will crumble, but did not happen. That must be the reason. I have a feeling that it has become a question of prestige for him. And he will not give up, I feel, until everything crumbles. And other day I heard the news that he had already warned his people for evacuation of drill to go towards the Siberia. What does it mean? I really do not know. I mean, going by him, I think he is a difficult man, to be honest. And he rarely smiles. Even if he smiles, you cannot make out what is in his mind. So I would feel that people have failed to understand him, but he underestimated his own military power. It is, I think, progressing much slower than what was anticipated. But eventually, I think when that happens, that becomes also dangerous, because you want to achieve something. You have made up your mind. but it's not happening. So you are forced to use more force. And what is going to happen? More devastations and more people will die. And I think Russia is couldn't even bothered what people are saying. I think he would have calculated everything, not as much, almost everything. He would have expected the West is going to impose sanctions. Possibly he did not expect that Germany also will join hands because of Nord Stream 2. But I think it's a question of frustration has set in now. So this is not a very good sign. And I would say the political scientists and diplomats must understand that ultimately who is going to suffer? Russians are going to suffer because of the sanctions. I'm not even counting the Russian soldiers who have died. Global economy is going to suffer. And also, Ukraine is already suffering. But there will be someone who gain benefit. I mean, I leave it to your judgment, or unless you want me to spell it out. You know, politicians and businessmen always know how to make profit out of conflict and difficult situations.
I mean, we know that in any war, the ones who make the most profit are those who sell the weapons. I mean, that goes without saying. But my greatest fear is that we create a logic. We either create a logic that leads out of the spiral of war. So let's say a neutralization of Ukraine, where everybody agrees we are better off with a compromise, or we will have a logic where it becomes the only source of survival for Ukraine to use trench warfare and guerrilla warfare, and more weapons flow in, and you militarize the entire population, and you basically create an Afghanistan in Europe, which would be a tremendous horror, right? I mean, Afghanistan, the country suffered for decades. It's absolutely devastating, and out of the logic of a never-ending conflict and small attacks on it through guerrilla warfare. I would hope that that's not the way it will go. But you said something very interesting at the beginning. You said, I don't take sides, which is one of the things you don't hear very often these days. But India especially decided not to join the sanctions. And it reminded me, also listening to you, reminds me a lot of the position that the non-aligned movement took back in the days. And India was, of course, a leader of the non-aligned movement. Now, when it comes to China, India joined the Quad and is kind of in a group of countries when it comes to this scenario. But with Russia, India has tried to stay on a political level kind of aloof. How do you interpret that? Is Europe just not India's affair, and therefore you don't take sides?
You see, no, not that. It is that it is always good to be able to take a very clear stand. But in politics, it is not possible always. So I think higher you rise in our thinking and decision-making process, you would find more and more ambiguity. And people take advantage. For instance, before I answer your questions, even in peace operations, on a sideline, I want to tell you, they say the 3 cardinal principles of peacekeeping operations: the consent, impartiality, and minimum use of force. And adherence to that give you legitimacy. But when you deconstruct all these 3 principles, you will find more and more ambiguity. Now, people do take advantage of ambiguity as it suits them because of the national interest. I too felt that India should have been able to take more clearer stand. But given the history and the relationship what we have with Russia, it has become slightly difficult. And mostly that I would say that I bring in this military domain into it. Apart from, you see, Russia has been our very, very close friends. And whenever there was a crisis situation, Russia has not dumped us. Of course, they always supported us. in 1971 war, when India went to liberate Bangladesh against Pakistan, Russia never dumped us. And we have got a lot of dealings with Russia as far as defense equipment is concerned. Most of the aircrafts, heavy machineries, your equipment, tanks, weapon come from Russia. Now, one is that sustenance of this equipment. This is very important. Even if you want to become self-sustained, it is not possible to become 100% to be able to self-sustain. You have to fall back on that country, the source where we got when imported the equipment from. So if you just go 100% against Russians, that what might happen is that I think sustenance will be slightly difficult, but I think we would be able to find ways to live with that. But apart from them, there are certain program, engagement, treaties have been signed in defense and technology. And these are well spaced out. These are very difficult things. It is not that I buy a piece of equipment for you and you decide not to help me in maintaining that equipment. I have money, I go to someone else and pick up that equipment. It is not a piece of equipment. So that is one part. Secondly, that I know you mentioned about Quad. Okay, I understand. We are part of the Quad, that is the Americans, Australians, Japan, and India. If you ask me individually, I do not give much weightage to Quad. Reason being, should something happens, USA, Australia, and Japan, they have the option and flexibility to distance themselves from China, but they do not have the luxury. Given a relationship, and we occupy a physical boundary.
Geography.
So should something happens, who suffers the most? Indian will suffer the most. Quad is fine. Second, Russia and China have come very close recently. Today, China has offered that they can possibly play a very constructive role to diffuse the conflict. And in spite of being a rival of India, I would say that yes, if you really want to save innocent human civilians or human beings, it is worth considering to go out of the political divide and find ways and means how to save these innocent civilians from destructions.
Do you see a window of opportunity for Indian diplomacy and Chinese diplomacy to join hands and help Europe in this situation?
I do not know much about India, but I think China can play a better role. Because you see, China has economically reached everywhere. BRI. When this pandemic broke out, there were a lot of talk of isolating China. But nothing had happened. How can you isolate when your country is invested in that country's economy? It's very difficult. So China has got a bigger say, I would say a slightly stronger leverage, and people might listen. Why I'm telling you that at this point of time, Putin must listen to someone. Yes, India is a good friend of Putin. Putin may listen to India or will listen to India. Also someone else. I think at this point of time, possibly best person whom Putin would have listened or should have listened to is the Secretary General of the United Nations. But the Secretary General of the United Nations, for that, have to be more of an even leader than to be a nationalist leader. I actually, this was a stark difference that, soon after General Assembly resolution was adopted, I know it was a decision of the majority of the members of the United Nations. But at that point of time, an UN leader, he's part of the UN. He doesn't have to take sides. Even if it is in his heart, he can always pass a comment. Yes, this is the response of the decision of the General Assembly, and I hope we'll find ways to diffuse the conflict as much as possible. But I'm sure you remember what outburst came from him soon after the adoption of the resolution. So that was finished. So Russia was not going to listen to him. So that is where I would say difference between an able UN leader who make something out of nothing and another leader who prefer to behave more of a nationalist leader than a UN leader. So I think even that point of time, I would say diplomacy we're talking about, even after General Assembly resolution is adopted, if I feel like politics of UN is also very complicated, I feel there was an opportunity to even offering a mediation and sending a delegation to meet both the leader of both the countries and find ways and means. Going to the extreme, very radical suggestion. Supposing the Secretary General takes the personal risk and says, okay, until this is solved, I am going to camp at Kiev. What do you think would have happened? But there's a personal risk involved. What happens, even leaders normally what happens, whenever take a decision, they calculate the risk involved in the outcome of the decision. Also the cost of that kind of decision because of the personal or the organizational interest. Maximum what will happen? A Secretary General, UN leaders would be sacked. Security Council members will say, will not endorse your second term. I mean, really it happens. What I'm saying that you have no power, but yet you have something to exercise. You can create a public opinion. I would say go to the extent of saying that, again, very radical ideas. Talking back in Yugoslavia war, if you remember, part of the Boutros Ghali's agenda for peace, when he said that preventive diplomacy, he also talked of preventive deployment as part of the preventive diplomacy. Okay, and preventive diplomacy include that information, preventive deployment, and also peace building. Now, in this case, when you start the preventive diplomacy, suppose you, by various mechanisms, they can convince both of them will take care of these two regions, separatist movement, Donetsk and Luhansk, and also neutrality is there that if supposing, for example, if there, not now, I'm talking of that time, a preventive deployment, if can take place with consent of both the parties, very important, that they agree that which kind of troops or which kind of country can participate, that become, I mean, de facto, I would say that a shield against any kind of threat from Europe to Russia and from Russia to Ukraine side. So it could have been done.
UN peacekeeping forces under an international mandate in order to be stationed there and function as people on the ground who then can create security just by virtue of being there.
Exactly. For instance, it had happened first time, I'm talking of preventive deployment. In first time it happened in Macedonia. They did not want, the international community did not want the Yugoslav war to spread over to Macedonia, now Republic of Macedonia, those days former Republic of Macedonia, Yugoslav Republic Macedonia, and also to see that there's the country does not suffer from internal stability. It stayed there for 4 to 5 years, prevented deployment. Now, these peacekeepers need not be very robust. Yeah, they can be suitably armed because they need self-protection also. But it can only happen provided both the countries, both the nation agree to it. Give you another example. That's why I'm saying as of now, what happened earlier, people never thought, people earlier thought when Dag Hammarskjöld actually, he wrote the report of the Gaza operation, he mostly thought about interstate conflict, not intrastate. And that is the time he identified the 3 principles of the peacekeeping. And basically, when interstate conflict takes place, peacekeeping operations will be deployed, peacekeeping missions inside in a neutral zone to separate both the sides until some political solution is found out. And both sides agree. The presence of those people, in fact, secure them. Take the case of Ethiopia, Eritrea. There was a border dispute. Yes, mission was closed down later for a different region. And when UNIFIL, Lebanon, is going on from 78. Israel keeps criticizing United Nations interim force for Lebanon. Whenever Hezbollah fires rockets at Israel, the UNIFIL is doing nothing. And Lebanese government and Hezbollah also criticize UNIFIL, even peacekeeping mission, that you cannot stop Israeli from attacking us. They have overflying Lebanese airspace, about hundreds of aircraft sorties every day. Cannot do that. But mere fact that from 78 till today, and after 2006 war, there has not been a major conflict. Because I would say, going by that, by positive contribution of the UN peacekeeping mission in the Middle East, that some kind of stability, relative stability has come in. There have been reduction in bloodshed, and by controlling on certain very small tactical incidents, which have the potential to go out of control and become a regional conflict, I think United Nations peacekeeping operation Lebanon has contributed to bring in negative peace in the Middle East. Similarly, in case of Ukraine and Russia, now that time has passed now. I am talking of what could have done. Okay, now it is, that window is closed. I think one of the options may or may not work. I think we should not disregard everything, every option by making a statement that is not going to happen. Who is going to? Unless you ask them, unless you give your proposal, idea, it may not work. What would work is that giving an idea. It may work. Today, people are talking about that. I am talking about, to be honest, preventive diplomacy and preventive deployment because of the Ukraine crisis. I actually close this chapter from my mind when I write articles. I only talk of intrastate conflict. But after Ukraine crisis, this thought has come to me, maybe there was an opportunity. There's no harm in it. So I feel that there was a chance, and I think there's still a chance if you can find someone who would be listened to by, at this point of time, entire world is, of course, accusing Putin.
But not the entire world, that's the point. The Western world likes to portray itself as the entire world, but it leaves out China, India, and everybody, and basically all of Africa, right? Yes. But because that's a very interesting thought, because we have other examples. I mean, the Korean War ended with an agreement that you would have a neutral observers in the 38 parallel, and a very interesting mix. 2 Western neutrals, Sweden and Switzerland, 2 Soviet neutrals, Poland and the Czech Republic, I believe, or Romania, the Czech Republic, I forgot, and 1 tiebreaker, India, the true neutral. who didn't really side with either. And okay, this operation itself had many flaws, but if we think about a potential political scenario to which Mr. Putin, Mr. Zelensky, and also NATO and Washington can say yes to, it would probably have to include a certain group of countries of which a few are friendly to one side, a few are friendly to the other, and maybe one in the middle in order to solve problems once you start stationing troops on the ground. And all of that would have to have some form of UN mandate, of course, for the legality of the deployment.
Yes, I fully agree with you. In fact, when I talk about the 3 peacekeeping principles, which are actually not written down in UN charters. These were identified when Dag Hammarskjöld was authorized by the General Assembly that you can establish a emergency force to defuse the situation. There was no strategy given to him, no mandate, specific mandate. So it was up to him how he wanted to strategize the deployment and undertake the operational activities. So what he did was, firstly, he believed that there should be consent from all the sides: Egypt, France, UK, and of course, Israel. Second, he also said what just now you mentioned, that in order to reduce the scope of misinterpretation or confusion or suspicion, he mentioned that no peacekeeping contingent from the either P5 countries or any country which could have any strategic or geographical interest or economic interest in the area of conflict would take part. Neutrality. That is still valid. Yes, what had happened was, as the contours of the conflict changed, it became more and more intrastate, and a number of armed groups were started to increase, violence has increased. So one found it very difficult to strictly adhere to the principle of neutrality, because to rein in these well-trained armed groups, rebel groups, you need capable troops, well-trained. And these are available only with a few nations, mostly with the Western country and some from the global South. So therefore, the principle of neutrality had to be tweaked. That's why they have replaced the word of neutrality by word impartiality. But mere fact that you brought up this issue now, I think rightly so, in Brahimi wrote that report, he continued to use this word in 2000, Lakhadar Brahimi, 2000. He used this word impartiality stroke neutrality. People can use it as a impartiality neutrality syndrome, but it is still valid. Like what you said is that if you find troops like what have been Korea, even now also, obviously, if they agree, you have to find troops composition which are acceptable to both of them. Certain amount of negotiation had to take place. Some kind of condition would be applied. But I think some of the ways, I think you would be able to find that, oh, these countries, like for example, you said Sweden. You said they're the good peacekeepers. You know, the Finland, Estonia, for Estonia is a very small country. Nowadays, like Indian peacekeepers are always accepted globally. Generally, we are to be seen as a, whatever way we call it. I would not like to define and split hairs between the meaning of impartiality and neutrality, because you are the expert, I'll be in deep end. But you understand what I'm trying to say, that we are not taking sides, we do only take side of the mandate. So I am sure they would have found some kind of, provided they wanted to do it. But point is that the process did not even begin. And I do not know what did the French president and the German president talk to them. But I would say this point, this was a lost opportunity for United Nations. I mean, nobody wants war. like my heart goes when I switch on the TV, I see the prams are being lined up outside. Babies have died. I know it could be, a lot of, I would say that even if I take out 60% of these, take it out because I would say West motivated, but at least 40% is true. I would not like it. I mean, what is the fault of the poor civilian populations? Because they have been continuously encouraged, I think. Ukraine was encouraged that, look, it is very important because of our own interest. And worst is like what you brought out earlier, even I fear that. Even if the conflict comes to an end, a lot of groups, volunteers have come to fight on behalf of Ukraine.
Mercenaries.
Mercenaries. Now, slowly and slowly, what has happened by the time war ends, they will be, addicted to getting things whatever they want without doing anything but showing the barrel of the gun. And this, and how would you control them? It is not easy to get them to the national stream. And time would come, I feel that these mercenaries or these insurgency movement, rebel groups is bound to spill over farther west to the Europe and also go to the East Russia. And it will be difficult, like what you said, that what happened in Russia is very difficult. And it will be, Ukraine will not be what it was. And for this, I blame everyone, to be honest. I blame the Russia for invading Ukraine, for what is happening. I also blame the Western leaders, including the NATO, for not, and also the United Nations, for not doing what they could have done to prevent the conflict.
I thank you for these very clear words, General. We must not forget Al-Qaeda and the entire terrorist movement that almost formed its own Islamic State in the Middle East was the outcome of the Iraq War, which was the outcome of like the complete devastation and militarization of large parts of the civilian population in that region. And if this militarization currently of Ukrainians and the entire Eastern Europe continues, there's another powder keg just waiting, just also because of the entire ethnic distribution of people. This could end up in a very, very, very costly and horrible humanitarian situation. Again, I mean, it took the Yugoslav wars to 10 years to end the sectarian fighting as well, right? And that was also basically an inner civil war of peoples who should be who are friendly to each other, used to be friendly, and then blew up into a horrible tragedy. So this might create something like that. Do you have maybe one more thought you want to share with us before we end the interview? Anything that's on your mind?
No, if you have anything, any question, if you want to ask me, okay, I would, because maybe you wanted to ask me that about India stand, whatever has taken about Ukraine conflict, how it is going to impact India's security. As for the capability of the military is concerned, I have explained to you that, yeah, it will impact on our military capabilities to some extent. But I am sure that, that the government and people in the still in uniform, they're taking note of them, and I think they will take steps so that our military capability is not weakened. But that notwithstanding, I think we have our own status, regional status, and people who do not like our country and are friendly or unfriendly neighbors, I'm sure they will look for an opportunity to destabilize that. So I would say that until the conflict ends, and for I think few more months, hopefully the conflict will come to an end. That's why I said few more months. I think we got to be very careful. I think our government need a very, very matured handling of any regional situation, internal situation which may come up.
India must be interested in an agreement that ends in a lawful way, right? I mean,
absolutely, absolutely. Because you see, one hand, very difficult, catch-22 situation. One hand, we respect sovereignty. But on the other hand, that we find it very difficult, India finds it very difficult to directly blame our long-term ally.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think the most suitable and appropriate option was to remain, abstain from the voting procedure. But at the same time, I can assure you that diplomatic parleys must be going on between our government and Russian government, and also the Ukraine, and also between our diplomats and the diplomats of both the sides, that trying to find ways or suggesting ways that it must come to an end. And politics otherwise very difficult to take a clearer stand, because people say that in international relation there are no permanent friends, only permanent interest. So many people have accused us within the country, opposition have accused the present government. I felt too bad until I listened to one of our former ambassadors, who was a permanent representative in New York, that why India decided to abstain from the voting. About 25-35 minutes clips. Should you be interested, I can share it with you. It's quite informative. It goes back in the time of 1950s and all.
Okay. Yes. Please do share that. I will also link it to this video. And I think with those words, I will close the interview. And I thank you very much, General Bardalai. And I hope to see you very soon again for another talk. Thank you very much.
Sure, but remember that I am not a political scientist.
I ask you with the experience you've got. So thank you very much for sharing it.
And I hope my experience that I shared with you of some importance, some value to you.
It has value. It gave me a lot of very good ideas, and I hope also other people good ideas for potential ways forward. And it just reinforces my view that moralizing the situation is not the way forward. Cooling it down with rational thought is hopefully the way forward.
The exact sentence, very correctly, apt closing sentence, I would say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, General.